Now what we kind of wanted to do is bring the speakers back up here and just sort of see if we can field some kind of questions that you might have pertinent to the topic, which is a point upon which I insist. And maybe we can handle 3 or 4 questions if you have them. Anyone? Yes, Ron.
Talked to the judge earlier today. Judge, would you explain to the audience about jury nullification, your attitude toward it, and perhaps Chesterton? Jury nullification.
Jury nullification.
Well, jury nullification refers to, I guess it's kind of a paradox in light of Chesterton was in favor of it. There are instances where a jury will take the case and will ignore the court's instructions and will just decide it, although they're sworn to follow the law as it's given to them by the court, and that's what's being referred to. And I think counsel made a reference to the O.J. Simpson criminal trial as being an example of that, and it does happen. It's a fallibility. I don't know that there's any way around it. Once the jury has rendered a decision, if there are no errors of law, they have the final say. So it's I guess it's a paradox in the sense that it doesn't fit the mold, but I think Chesterton would take the position that we are fallible. Anything worth doing is worth doing badly, and it's one price we pay, just something we try to minimize.
Scott?
Well, where did you happen to come across that information on your topic, Apollonius of Tyana?
Good question.
Well, that is a good question. Actually, it's Scott Caton, you might appreciate this too. We had a member, Father Julian Phelan, who was a Capuchin friar. He died a few years ago. He died actually serving the Dominicans, which, if you know the Franciscans and Dominicans, that actually makes sense. And he had duct tape on his shoes and everything. The man was amazing. He gave Scott Caton a truckload of his books when his prior told him, you got to get rid of your stuff. He was a Franciscan. He wasn't allowed to hold stuff. And, he had all these books. Imagine the greed of the man. And he gave me 7 volumes of a set Formation of Christendom by T.W. Ollies, who was a contemporary of Newman in the Oxford movement. And Newman's real focus is on philosophy, the history of philosophy, and he pulls up this Apollonius of Tyana from the dust, really. But you don't really have to go too far to look at it. As I said, that stuff is online. You can get it. It's in the Loeb Classical Series in the original Greek. If you really want to learn Greek, to read that. And I think Hugh was saying, it's every bit as poetic as I read to you. It's just real fun. But that's a gift of the late Father Julian Phelan. Yes, he was. Yes. Sorry, I guess this isn't really a panel question, but Do we have any more panel-y kind of things? Steve?
A question about paradox. I think it was in Hugh Penner's book, either Marshall, it might have been Marshall's introduction, Paradox of Chesterton. It talks about how, Chesterton was a master of paradox, but really, he was really just kind of imitating, Christ in his, when he was giving his parables, or it was heavily written with paradox. So is it true that, then would you say that, any of you, that Christianity really has a monopoly on paradox, or is it really just kind of a literary device? Would it be kind of like saying that Christianity has a monopoly on use of analogy or metaphor or something? So what?
As opposed to Buddhism, as opposed to. Good question. Anybody want to?
Cross cultures.
Since Stephen's my son, he won't accept my answer in any event. So
well, I think the key issue is the paradox. The truth itself is paradoxical. Christianity is paradoxical because Christianity is true. So I don't think the paradox is a literary device. It can be used as such, but really that's just literature imitating reality, art imitating life, if you like. The greatest truths are paradoxes.
And of course, Chesterton always begged off the fact, he always insisted he wasn't using paradoxes. He says, I'm just restating old, worn-out truths, but they sound paradoxical because we're so unused to hearing them. But he says, someday I'm going to write a book on the subject called Paradox Lost.
Oh dear, yeah. I do think there's something important in the distinction between the use of paradox, as I've said before, and the recognition of paradox. I do think at least there is an account available. I mean, you find it at least in Aristotle and very strongly in Aquinas of language as essentially analogical, as always involving us in sameness and difference. And that, it seems to me, immediately gives rise to the possibility of what Kant calls verbal paradox. To me, the most interesting, and I do think often a most difficult question concerns when you've gone beyond verbal paradox. When are you perceiving paradox in, or I would say, mystery in being?
That the truth is paradoxical rather than your expression.
The truth is a mystery, and of course that is certainly central. I don't think it's that Christianity has a monopoly on that, but it is certainly central.
Yeah, I guess I sort of like to comment. I mean, I guess, Stephen, you know, like, I know in thinking about this conference and working with this topic, you know, if you look, and as Dale said before, I mean, you know, the figure of Christ is essentially paradoxical, and it is truly, it's a wonderful exercise that I recommend to anyone to try and read the Christ story and put the eyes of faith aside and just read it, and you know, you can really be astounded. You can almost be led into the into the intellectual error to think that if it's not paradoxical, it's not true. You know what I mean? But if you really look at the story, I mean, the things he says, the miracles, the countless incidents. I mean, you know. So I guess it's so fundamental to Christianity, but it's like, is it fundamental to Buddhism? Is it fundamental to Muhammad? You know, I don't know. It doesn't seem. You know, I mean, Christ is the only figure that makes the claims that he does. You know, and Chesterton points that out. Yes.
In Common Sense 101, page 17, it says Chesterton thought that all habits are bad habits.
I'll answer this one.
I didn't understand that.
His argument there about all habits being bad habits is that he's always defending free will. And when you do something, it should be an act of the will rather than your body acting for you, or in other words, the habit taking over for you. Now, that's a distinction from the idea of establishing good discipline. Like to say it's good discipline to go to Mass every day. It's good discipline to pray on a regular basis. But if those things become habits, we stop thinking about them, and we've stopped our active participation in them, and that's the meaning of that line.
John, you.
Well, some of the complication comes here perhaps from, I don't know if you're familiar with it, any of you, but there's a collection of the letters of Flannery O'Connor published a number of years ago, The Habit of Being. Now, what's intended there is not the sort of habit that Dale is referring to. There is an older sense of habit as an acquired, enduring condition out of which you are or act in certain ways without, and it's just a simple example. I imagine there's somebody in here, maybe several here, who can speak Spanish. But as far as I know, none of them are speaking Spanish at the moment. So in that respect, they're exactly like me, because I'm not speaking Spanish either. The difference is, in that sense of habit, it is captured in that title of Flannery O'Connor's letters, The Habit of Being. The difference is, I can't decide now to speak Spanish. And the ones who actually possess the habit, that is, know the language, can. So in that sense, there's a different sense of habit that actually signifies a possibility for the one possessing it that the rest of us don't have. I think there's some reference to that in Habit of Grace as well. That's another matter.
Oh, I'd like that microphone. No, I angered Dale last year by quoting extensively from Flannery O'Connor's The Habit of Being, and I made a promise to myself not even to bring it up. So John, you just stepped right in it, and now you got Dale all upset.
I was paid for that move, I'm sorry.
And she would read, as a child, she would read the Summa in bed. Before, and her mother would tell her to turn off the lights, and she said, no, I'm reading the Summa. So, very unusual lady. Just a yes, Sherwood.
I have a general question, but I think Dale might jump at it first. I'm not sure if I understand how to ask the question, but my heart is pounding, so I feel like compelled to ask the question. When we were kids, we were taught that when you're confirmed, you're now a soldier of Christ. You're defending the faith or whatever. Some of us were only 10 at the time. But as we get older, we know that we're invited, the church invites us to share in the ministry of Christ, to be priest, prophet, and king, and all the associations that go with those offices. So when we're trying to think of Chesterton's work in the area of apologia and defending the faith and so on, and you said, if you can't explain it to a cab driver, what is your faith, so to speak. So I'm trying to say, when God created the universe, or started creation, the divine logos, was there any paradox in that, or was it straightforward?
You mean the incarnate, the logos? Okay.
Creation.
Okay.
Speaking
Creation.
things into existence.
Speaking things into
Yes,
existence.
the divine logos. There is a regular logos.
Yes. Okay. I know.
And then there is the divine logos.
Well, you get the sense of paradox right away in the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. There's a paradox there already.
Right.
The Word is with God, the Word was God. There's the paradox. You have to understand, as the Trinity is starting to be explained, that Christ and the Father are one, but they're also two. And that's paradoxical.
We're on dangerous ground right here. I mean,
Fortunately, we have Chesterton.
Yes, I know. I don't know, Sherwin. I don't know that we really do justice to
The
your question.
gentleman who was speaking on Hilaire Block earlier, he wrote a book, I think in the early 30s, on the coming dangers and spread of Islam. What is the title of that? I'd like to get it.
The Great Heresies.
Yeah, The Great Heresies is his main book. It's not just about Islam, but there's a very long chapter about Islam. It's called The Great Heresies.
The Great Heresies?
Yeah, in actual fact, in that book also, he mentions that that the West should remember forever the date of the lifting of the siege of Vienna, which happened on September the 11th. And certainly after 9/11, a lot of people wondered, well, maybe the West has forgotten, but perhaps Islam hasn't.
Thank you.
Yes, one more question. Go ahead. Yes.
My name's Tom. I guess this is a question for the panel. In Chesterton's dealing with Darwinian atheists, the paradox of atheism, did he ever use, well, of course, Darwinists thought of believe in the primordial soup, called out of the primordial soup, lightning, chemicals, whatever, proteins, and we crawled out of there, and we are of the earth. So did Chesterton ever find a way to ask them, if we are of the earth, the bodies of the earth, where did our sense of justice come from? Justice is not from the soil. It's
Where the man's soul come from is really kind of what you're getting at. I mean, isn't that the everlasting man problem that you're getting at, Tom?
A sense of footage, a sense of justice.
Justice, yes, where's the sense of justice come from?
Where does that come from? How does the atheist explain where that comes from? And how does Chesterton explain it?
Would it be natural law or natural law?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Well, I know one thing that Chesterton does say when he's talking about the Darwinians is that they seem to think that the problem of these problems such as this are solved by talking about something dilatory in the process. The fact that it took a long while, therefore it removes any necessity for argument. And of course, Chesterton said that's nonsense because, talking about the question of justice, how do we come by what the philosophers would call a rational soul as opposed to an animal soul? Now, at what point do we become rational in that sense, which a Christian understands as being meaning in the image of God? That issue, that central issue of being in a rational sense there is not answered. In fact, the question is not even framed in just saying, well, it took 5 million years. I mean, it's like chalk and cheese. There's no connection. And he certainly did make that point.
He does pose the question, or the dilemma of saying that if man is not divinely created, if there's not this divine quality to man, he's just totally, quote, a disease of the dust. Everything that we see is completely the accidental byproduct of an unintended process. And those are the only two explanations. So he does pose the question back to the Darwinist. And he talks about Darwinism a lot, and he talks about it in distinction from evolution in general, but he attacks Darwinian evolution in particular because he says it just doesn't really explain anything.
Okay. Okay. All right, we'll take one.
I was just wondering if Chesterton commented or if you have other sort of references to the significance of the early Christians and maybe the ancient world of paradoxy, because it seems to be probably meant a lot more to them than it does to us in the modern world. And I'm thinking of the Celtic cross, which is kind of representation of the circle of the universe and the contradiction of the cross shining through that. And that goes back to about the year 400. It must have meant a lot to those people then, and we hardly even see it today. So I don't know if Chesterton comments.
Well, he certainly talks about those symbols and the what they represent throughout history, because they are sort of universal symbols, and the interpretation of them transcends time. When he talks about ancient man or early Christianity, the best references are really in the Everlasting Man. He talks about the initial reaction to the church as it came along, and I think that's where the answer to that question is. There was one more question back there.
Steve, go ahead.
I'm just curious if you think there's such a thing as an evil misuse of paradox, kind of like more of the old slogan destroy the village and the Satan. If you find those throughout life, how can you tell the difference from Satan kind of like using the paradox along?
Yeah, he talks about that in Orthodoxy. He says there's nothing worse than a false paradox because it's as easy as lying. He says, in fact, it is lying. A false paradox is a lie. He also deals with the false paradox in his book on George Bernard Shaw, because Shaw is quite a purveyor of paradox as well. But Shaw is a perfect example of false paradox. I think we had some examples from Oscar Wilde earlier, but a Shaw false paradox would be the golden rule is that there is no golden rule. And he says, it's easy to say these merely contradictory things, but they're simply meaningless. They sound amusing, like an Oscar Wildeism, like I can resist anything except temptation. They're amusing, but they're false, and they breed a sort of cynicism, which is a detachment from real intellectual engagement.
You can kind of see the difference by their fruit.
Yeah, by their fruits, good test, always a good test.
Thank you.